Imagine this. You wake up one morning and something feels wrong. Not in the way a bad dream lingers, but deeper an ache that sits beneath your thoughts, like a quiet pulse of dread. You look around your room, at the familiar shapes of your life, the phone, the clothes, the mirror, and realize that everything appears normal, yet none of it feels alive. The world has lost its color, its pulse. You tell yourself it's stress, fatigue, maybe just another passing low, but somewhere inside, a voice whispers what you've always feared. Something in you is dying, or perhaps something in you is trying to be born. That's the paradox. Carl Jung devoted his life to exploring the idea that pain, suffering, and inner conflict are not enemies to be destroyed, but doorways to something higher, something terrifyingly powerful. He believed that every moment of agony conceals a hidden demand from the unconscious: evolve or perish. Yet modern life trains you to do the opposite. When discomfort comes, you scroll, you numb, you distract. You smother the spark of pain before it can speak. You've been taught that happiness is the goal, that ease is a virtue, that peace is the reward of progress. But what if it's not? What if this endless pursuit of comfort is the very thing that keeps you weak, fragmented, and lost? Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." It's a sentence so simple that most overlook its brutality. He wasn't offering poetic advice, he was describing a law of the psyche, a truth as unyielding as gravity. Consciousness expands through suffering, not despite it. And yet, nearly every aspect of our culture is built around escaping it. You are surrounded by promises of painless transformation, motivational slogans, quick fix therapies, spiritual shortcuts. Each one whispers the same lie: you can evolve without suffering. But Jung knew that was impossible. The psyche demands payment for growth, and pain is its chosen currency. The question is not whether you will suffer, it's whether your suffering will destroy you or transform you. Think of the moments that shaped you most profoundly. Were they moments of ease, of comfort? Or were they born from heartbreak, loss, humiliation, or fear? Each wound you've endured has carved a new depth in you, a space where light might enter, if you dare to face it. But facing it requires descending into the dark places within yourself. The memories you repress, the impulses you deny, the anger you disguise as virtue, the shame you bury beneath smiles. Jung called this confrontation shadow work, the process of meeting the hidden parts of your psyche that the conscious ego refuses to acknowledge. He believed that true power, not dominance, not control, but inner sovereignty, arises only when a person integrates their shadow. Yet the path to that integration is always paved with pain, because to integrate the shadow is to be burned by it. You must confront the parts of yourself that terrify you: the envy, the cruelty, the cowardice, the repressed desires, and forgotten dreams. Each one is a ghost haunting your inner world. To face them is to shatter your self-image, to destroy the illusion that you are already whole. This is the crucifixion of the ego that precedes all genuine rebirth. But who among us wants to suffer voluntarily? Who willingly walks into the fire? Our culture celebrates those who appear healed, not those who are still bleeding. We idolize strength without understanding that strength is not the absence of pain but the capacity to endure it without turning away. Jung saw the modern obsession with positivity as a collective neurosis, an avoidance of the unconscious, a refusal to grow up spiritually. He warned that what you refuse to face within yourself does not disappear. It sinks deeper, grows stronger, and eventually manifests as fate. You can repress your pain, but it will return in your addictions, your relationships, your anxieties, your endless sense of restlessness. What you avoid becomes what controls you. So, what if the very emotions you're desperate to escape, the grief, the confusion, the loneliness, are not obstacles but invitations? What if pain isn't a punishment, but a teacher? What if the soul's evolution depends not on fleeing darkness, but on embracing it consciously? Here lies the contradiction that sits at the center of the human psyche. We want transformation, but we resist the process that creates it. We crave power, but reject the pain that forges it. We want freedom, but we cling to the chains of comfort. And so, we wander through life half awake, medicated by distraction, terrified of silence, mistaking numbness for peace. But beneath that numbness, something ancient still stirs, an instinct older than civilization, calling you back to the forgotten truth that suffering, when faced consciously, is sacred. Jung understood that pain is not an accident of existence, it is its architect. It shapes character, deepens awareness, dismantles illusions. It is the fire that refines consciousness, burning away everything false until only truth remains. He compared this process to alchemy, the medieval art of turning base metals into gold. To the alchemist, the lead wasn't a mistake, it was the beginning. Likewise, your pain isn't a flaw in your design, it's the raw material of transformation. The ego, like lead, must endure the fire of suffering to become the gold of the self, the fully realized, integrated consciousness that Jung believed was humanity's highest goal. So, the next time you feel despair tightening its grip, ask yourself, what if this is not a breakdown, but an initiation? What if your suffering is not a sign of weakness, but a summons, an inner call to grow beyond who you've been? Because according to Jung, it is in the wound that your destiny hides. And the deeper the wound, the greater the power waiting on the other side. The only question is whether you will dare to enter it, and that is where the journey begins. You live in an age that worships ease. Every second, 1,000 machines hum to ensure you don't have to lift a finger. Every app whispers, don't think too hard, don't feel too much. We have mastered comfort, but lost the ability to suffer meaningfully. And beneath the glittering surface of progress lies a silent epidemic, an inner starvation, a psychic emptiness that grows stronger the more we try to escape it. Carl Jung saw this coming long before the digital world began numbing the collective mind. He looked into the modern psyche and saw not progress, but fragmentation. The more humanity advanced outwardly in technology, in comfort, in convenience, the more it regressed inwardly. Man had conquered the external world, but lost the map to his internal one. The hidden problem, Jung realized, is not that we suffer but that we no longer know why we suffer. Pain once had meaning. In ancient times, it was understood as a rite of passage, a spiritual test, a confrontation with the gods or one's own soul. But in modernity, pain became a malfunction, something to be anesthetized, medicated, silenced. The human psyche, deprived of symbolic meaning, began to rot from within. You've been taught that pain is an error to correct, that sadness is a disorder, that anger is toxic, that anxiety is irrational. You've been conditioned to interpret all negative emotion as something to be fixed rather than understood. And yet, Jung argued that those very emotions are messages from the unconscious signals that something essential within you is being neglected. Every time you suppress pain, you suppress transformation. Every time you numb your suffering, you postpone your evolution. But what drives this collective repression? What keeps modern man terrified of his own depths? It begins with the ego, that fragile structure we mistake for our identity. The ego's mission is survival, not truth. It clings to stability, to order, to the illusion of control. It wants to maintain a coherent self-image at all costs, even if that image is built on lies. To the ego, pain is a threat because pain means something is wrong, something unstable, something unknown. And the unknown is the territory of the unconscious, a vast ocean that dwarfs the tiny raft of the rational mind. Jung wrote that the ego is like a small island floating on an infinite sea. Most people live their entire lives defending that island, terrified of what lies beneath the waves. But the sea, the unconscious, holds everything the ego has rejected: the shame, the trauma, the forbidden desires, the repressed potential. To explore it requires humility and courage, the willingness to be shattered. This is why the modern world avoids pain. Pain is the sound of the unconscious knocking. It announces that something buried is rising to the surface. And instead of facing it, society teaches you to distract, consume, escape. The more we run from the unconscious, the more we become slaves to it. Friedrich Nietzsche called this the tragedy of modern man, that he has forgotten how to suffer. In his eyes, suffering was not merely a condition to endure, but a crucible for greatness. What does not kill me makes me stronger, he wrote, not as a cliché of resilience, but as a metaphysical truth. Nietzsche saw suffering as the engine of evolution, the test through which one transcends mediocrity. But modern comfort culture stripped suffering of its sacredness. It made life painless and therefore meaningless. Arthur Schopenhauer, too, warned of this paradox. He saw existence as inherently painful, driven by endless desire and dissatisfaction. But he also recognized that suffering forces consciousness to awaken. When you suffer, you are forced to confront the futility of chasing pleasure. You see through illusion. You are dragged, sometimes violently, into self-awareness. For Schopenhauer, suffering was the price of insight, and those who avoided it lived as shadows of themselves. Yet here lies the cruel irony. Modern civilization is built upon the repression of pain, and that repression is precisely what creates suffering in new forms. You suppress emotional pain and develop psychosomatic illness. You avoid spiritual crisis and fall into depression. You numb loneliness with screens and wonder why connection feels hollow. pain denied does not vanish, it mutates. Aldous Huxley saw this mutation clearly when he wrote Brave New World, a society that eliminated pain entirely through drugs, pleasure, and conditioning, only to discover it had also eliminated meaning. Happiness became compulsory, and truth was forgotten. In that world, people were content, but not alive. Are we so different now? The methods have changed, but the impulse is the same. You are surrounded by distractions that promise instant relief, entertainment, dopamine, validation, yet the more you consume, the emptier you feel. The soul, Jung said, does not grow in pleasure, it grows in suffering. And a culture that abolishes pain abolishes the conditions for depth, wisdom, and individuality. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, came to the same conclusion. He observed that those who could find meaning in their suffering were far more likely to endure it than those who saw it as meaningless. If there is meaning in life at all, he wrote, then there must be meaning in suffering. Frankl's insight was not born from theory, but from the abyss itself. He discovered that even in the darkest despair, man retains the power to choose how he responds. That choice is the seed of power. Jung spoke of the transformation of pain into consciousness, but modern man has forgotten how to choose. The collective mind has been conditioned to seek escape before reflection. You feel discomfort and instantly reach for the remedy. A screen, a pill, a purchase, a distraction. You call it self-care, but often it is self-abandonment, because every time you run from discomfort, you abandon the part of you that's trying to speak through it. The real question, then, is not why we suffer, but why we no longer know how to suffer. Jung believed this loss of meaning is the central neurosis of our time. Without the ability to suffer consciously, the psyche becomes shallow, reactive, fragmented. Instead of integrating pain, we project it outward into our politics, our relationships, our religions. We turn our unacknowledged wounds into ideologies and wars. The hidden problem is not outside you, it's in the way you relate to what hurts. The enemy is not pain itself, but your fear of it. Because pain, when met with awareness, becomes energy. It becomes insight, empathy, creativity, transformation. But when resisted, it festers and poisons the soul. And this is the root of all modern suffering, the refusal to face one's own darkness. We've mistaken repression for healing, numbness for peace, avoidance for evolution. We've turned away from the inner world, hoping that outer comfort could replace inner truth. But the unconscious does not forget. It waits patiently, gathering force, until one day the illusion collapses, and we find ourselves face to face with everything we tried to escape. So perhaps the real question is this: what if the pain you feel is not a flaw in your life, but a signal that you are ready to grow beyond the limits of who you are? And if that's true, what happens to a civilization that silences every signal? Imagine a society that fears silence more than death. Everywhere you go, there's noise, music, chatter, advertisements, notifications, a ceaseless hum designed to protect you from one simple experience: being alone with yourself. The moment silence appears, something inside you stirs, and you can feel it: the unease, the hidden ache, the whisper of your unlived life. So, you turn the volume up again, you scroll, you consume, you distract. But beneath this endless stimulation lies a quiet catastrophe. What happens to a civilization that builds its entire identity around avoiding pain? Carl Jung believed the answer was nothing short of collective madness. When individuals repress their inner suffering, the unacknowledged energy of that pain doesn't vanish, it moves outward. It begins to infect the collective psyche, manifesting as anxiety, depression, violence, obsession, and spiritual emptiness. Jung called this process psychic contagion, the spread of unconscious shadow material across society. When people refuse to face their darkness, the darkness finds another way to be expressed. And that's exactly what we see today. Look around. Our addictions are not isolated disorders, but symptoms of a deeper spiritual sickness. We are addicted not just to substances, but to control, attention, validation, entertainment, progress, anything that numbs the ache of meaninglessness. The problem is not that we seek pleasure, but that we seek it to escape pain, and in doing so, we lose the capacity to feel anything at all. Gabor Mate, the physician who devoted his life to studying addiction and trauma, described this with chilling clarity. The question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. Modern society treats addiction as a personal failure, but it's actually a mirror, a reflection of collective avoidance. We are a civilization addicted to anesthesia, terrified of consciousness. You see it in the way people talk. Stay positive, they say, as though positivity were a moral virtue and pain a sin. But enforced positivity is not healing, it's repression wearing a smile. The more we try to appear fine, the more fragmented we become. Beneath the curated images and polished lives, people are breaking quietly, invisibly, in ways the world doesn't measure. And yet, this repression has consequences that reach far beyond the individual. When pain is denied collectively, it metastasizes into systems, ideologies, and cultural patterns. Jung warned that what we fail to integrate within ourselves becomes projected into the external world, a psychological truth that explains the cycles of violence and division that plague human history. You can see this in politics, the rise of outrage culture, tribalism, moral absolutism. These are not signs of ideological strength. They're symptoms of psychic immaturity. When people cannot bear their own inner contradictions, they project them onto others. The enemy becomes a convenient container for everything they refuse to face within themselves. The result is perpetual conflict, a world locked in shadow wars, both literal and symbolic. You can see it in consumerism, the endless pursuit of more. More money, more success, more comfort, more validation. But what is consumerism, really, if not a ritualized form of avoidance? Each purchase, each upgrade, each novelty offers a brief reprieve from the inner void. Yet the more we consume, the hungrier we become. The psyche cannot be nourished by material abundance. It feeds only on meaning, and meaning is born from struggle. You can even see it in our relationships. We enter them seeking wholeness, hoping someone else will save us from the parts of ourselves we cannot face. But Jung warned that when two people meet, it is not their egos that collide, it is their unconscious minds. Every repressed wound, every buried emotion, every unacknowledged desire becomes a ghost between them. And when those ghosts are ignored, love turns to resentment, intimacy to fear. We call it heartbreak, but often it's just our own shadow reflected back at us. This is the unseen consequence of a world that refuses pain. It becomes haunted by it. Pain does not vanish, it transforms. It becomes disguised as ideology, addiction, distraction, consumerism, anxiety, even entertainment. You can see it in the compulsive need to stay busy, to never stop moving, thinking, doing. Stillness has become unbearable, because in stillness, the truth emerges. And that truth is simple, but terrifying. We are not at peace because we have forgotten how to suffer consciously. Neurologically, this is not just philosophy, it's biology. When you experience pain and suppress it, your brain activates stress pathways designed for survival. Cortisol floods your system, the amygdala heightens its response, and your body begins to live in defense mode. Chronic avoidance keeps your nervous system trapped in vigilance. You don't rest, you merely collapse. The result is what psychologists now call existential fatigue, a deep, soul-level exhaustion that no amount of rest can cure. But when pain is faced consciously, when it is allowed to move through you, expressed, integrated, the brain changes. The prefrontal cortex strengthens, new neural pathways form, suffering processed with awareness becomes wisdom. It expands your capacity to regulate emotion, to empathize, to act with courage. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming whole, of turning pain into power through consciousness. Yet, as a culture, we remain asleep to this alchemy. Instead, we build systems to numb it, pharmaceuticals that flatten emotional range, social media that replaces introspection with comparison, algorithms that feed us what we already believe, so we never confront our ignorance. We call this progress, but Jung would call it collective avoidance. And collective avoidance, he warned, always ends in catastrophe. Because the psyche has a law, what is repressed must eventually return. We see this return everywhere now, in the rising rates of depression among youth, in the loneliness epidemic, in the increasing polarization of societies that can no longer speak to each other. These are not isolated issues. They are symptoms of a deeper illness, the fragmentation of the human soul. The collective unconscious is erupting through cracks in the facade of modern life, demanding recognition. But instead of listening, we medicate, entertain, and distract ourselves further, perpetuating the cycle. The most dangerous consequence of all is spiritual amnesia. We've forgotten that pain has meaning. Without meaning, suffering becomes unbearable, and without the capacity to bear it, we lose our humanity. Nietzsche saw this with terrifying clarity. When meaning collapses, nihilism takes its place, and in a nihilistic world, pleasure becomes the only god left to worship. This is the quiet apocalypse. Jung foresaw not a war of nations, but a war within the soul of man. A war between consciousness and unconsciousness, between the desire to awaken and the desire to remain numb. Every addiction, every distraction, every denial of pain is a vote for unconsciousness. And every moment of awareness, every act of courage to face suffering directly, is a vote for awakening. The unseen consequence of avoiding pain is not just personal weakness, it is the decay of civilization's spirit. A culture that cannot face its suffering becomes shallow, hysterical, spiritually ill. It forgets art, depth, wonder. It forgets how to love. And so the question returns, the one Jung left for all of us. What would happen if, instead of fleeing from pain, we turned toward it? What if we stopped numbing and started listening? What would the world become if individuals reclaimed the lost art of conscious suffering? Because perhaps then, we would remember what the ancients knew, that pain is not the enemy of life, but its crucible. That within the wound lies the seed of power, and that every time you run from pain, you run from the very thing that could make you whole. Imagine standing before a mirror that reflects not your face, but your soul. You see everything you've hidden, the fears you disguise as logic, the envy you call ambition, the grief you never allowed yourself to feel. At first, you recoil. It's too much, too raw, too unfamiliar. But slowly, something changes. You stop judging, you stop running, you simply look, and for the first time, you realize that what you feared most isn't the darkness, it's your own light waiting to be born through it. That moment, the decision to stop fleeing from yourself, is where rebellion begins. Carl Jung believed that true transformation requires a spiritual revolt against the collective hypnosis of comfort. He saw that society conditions individuals to live safely within the boundaries of their personas, the masks they wear to survive. But the self, the deeper center of the psyche, demands more. It calls you into the unknown, into conflict, into pain, because that's where authenticity is forged. Jung's message was not self-help, it was revolution. To break free is to commit treason against everything false in you. And it begins with awareness. The first act of rebellion is to stop numbing yourself. Pain avoided is pain multiplied, but pain faced becomes power. Instead of asking, how can I make this feeling go away? Ask, what is this pain trying to teach me? This is not poetic metaphor. It is psychological precision. Every emotion carries intelligence. Fear signals something you have not yet mastered. Grief points to what you have loved deeply. Anger reveals where your boundaries have been violated. Anxiety exposes the distance between the life you live and the one you long for. When you listen, truly listen, your suffering begins to speak a language of transformation. But this requires courage, because to hear it, you must enter silence, the very space our civilization fears most. Turn off the noise. Sit still, feel, let the discomfort rise. Watch how quickly the mind rebels, reaching for distraction, justification, escape. Don't stay there. Breathe. Endure the chaos until it starts to dissolve. What you'll find beneath it isn't despair, it's clarity. The mind becomes transparent, and beneath the turbulence, something ancient whispers, this is who you are. That is the first taste of freedom. The second act of rebellion is the integration of the shadow. Jung taught that you cannot become whole by perfecting your light. You become whole by owning your darkness. The parts of yourself you've exiled, the anger, jealousy, lust, weakness, ambition, vulnerability, are not enemies. They are fragments of power trapped in shame. The shadow is not evil. It is repressed vitality. To integrate it, you must stop pretending. Stop claiming to be only good, only kind, only rational. Admit what you are not to justify it, but to understand it. When you bring awareness to your shadow, you transform it. Anger becomes assertiveness. Fear becomes sensitivity. Desire becomes creativity. The energy that once controlled you becomes fuel for consciousness. But this process is not comfortable. It's not supposed to be. Jung warned that anyone seeking enlightenment without confronting their shadow is merely painting light over rot. You cannot bypass the underworld. You must ascend. Every myth, from Christ's crucifixion to Odysseus's journey, from Buddha's temptation to Dante's Inferno, tells the same story. The hero must enter darkness to find truth. Pain is not a detour on the path. It is the path. The third act of rebellion is meaning. When pain is met without meaning, it crushes. But when it is integrated into a story, it redeems. Viktor Frankl's insight echoes Jung's. Man can endure anyhow, if he has a why. Meaning transforms suffering from chaos into creation. This is the essence of alchemy, turning the lead of experience into the gold of wisdom. Ask yourself, what is my suffering demanding from me? If your pain has returned again and again, it's not because you're cursed, it's because you're resisting the lesson. Maybe it's asking for honesty, boundaries, courage, surrender. Maybe it's inviting you to stop performing, to stop pleasing, to stop pretending. When you understand that pain has purpose, it stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like initiation. And here lies the great paradox, the one that terrifies and liberates at once. You are not supposed to be comfortable. Comfort is not your natural state. Growth is. Life itself is a tension between order and chaos, pleasure and suffering, birth and death. Jung called this enantiodromia the law of opposites. Whatever you avoid, you eventually become ruled by. Whatever you face, you transcend. So, the only way to transcend pain is to move through it consciously. The fourth act of rebellion is solitude. You cannot awaken surrounded by noise. You need the stillness of aloneness, not loneliness, but solitude. The space where your inner voice becomes audible. Most people fear solitude because it strips them of identity. Without others' eyes to reflect who they are, they feel invisible, undefined. But Jung saw solitude as the furnace of individuation. Only in isolation does the self speak clearly. Only in silence can the unconscious reveal its patterns. You must learn to be alone, not as exile, but as initiation. Because when you can sit with yourself, your boredom, your longing, your sorrow, and not flee, you become unbreakable. The fifth act of rebellion is to live symbolically. Jung believed that modern man's greatest loss was his disconnection from symbolic life, from myth, ritual, meaning. When we view everything literally, we strip the soul from experience. But the psyche speaks in symbols, dreams, metaphors. Every hardship carries archetypal significance. Your heartbreak is not just personal, it's the universal story of loss and renewal. Your failures are not punishments, they are initiations into humility and resilience. To live symbolically is to see your life as a work of art, chaotic, unfinished, sacred. It's to realize that every wound is a brushstroke shaping the masterpiece of your becoming. And finally, the sixth act of rebellion is love, not sentimental love, but conscious love. To love consciously is to meet life with radical openness, even when it hurts. Jung knew that love is the greatest transformer because it dissolves the illusion of separateness. When you love, truly love, you allow the world to break you open. And in that breaking, you discover your strength. Love is not the opposite of pain, it is its companion. You cannot love deeply without risking suffering. But that suffering, when held with awareness, becomes ecstasy. It reveals that power is not domination, but depth. Not control, but surrender. To rebel, then, is not to reject pain, it is to redefine it. It is to stand in the fire and say, burn what is false, leave only what is real. Because rebellion, in the Jungian sense, is not about overthrowing systems. It's about overthrowing illusions. It's the revolution of the soul against the tyranny of unconsciousness. And this revolution begins in the most dangerous, most sacred territory of all, your own heart. But make no mistake, this path is not for the faint of spirit. To live consciously in a world addicted to numbness is to live as an exile. You will be misunderstood, even ridiculed. You will lose people who prefer your mask to your truth. But in exchange, you will gain something priceless: integrity. The quiet, unshakable knowing that no matter how deep the darkness, you are not its prisoner, you are its witness. And once you become that witness, once you can hold pain without collapsing, once you can love without possession, once you can suffer consciously, the world itself begins to shift, because the collective can only heal when the individual becomes whole. That is the rebellion. Jung envisioned a generation of awakened individuals who no longer fear the fire because they have become it. Imagine standing on the edge of a great abyss. The ground beneath you trembles. The sky above seems infinite and uncaring. You have been walking for years through loss, through failure, through 1,000 small deaths of the self. You've searched for light, for understanding, for peace. And now, as you peer into the darkness, you realize something both terrifying and beautiful. The abyss is not outside of you, it's inside. Carl Jung once wrote, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." He meant that to rise, you must descend. To awaken, you must suffer. To become whole, you must first break. For Jung, the great paradox of life was that pain and power are not opposites, they are mirrors. One cannot exist without the other. The wound is the womb of transformation. And this is the ultimate truth that modern man has forgotten. Pain is not a barrier to wholeness. It is wholeness trying to break through. All your life, you have been taught that pain is an error, a deviation from the ideal state of happiness. You've been told to move on, to stay positive, to find distractions, to manage discomfort with medication or noise. But what if pain is not a malfunction, but a message? What if it's the psyche's way of calling you home to yourself? When you stop running and turn toward it, something remarkable happens. The boundaries between good and bad, light and dark, begin to dissolve. You realize that suffering was never your enemy, it was your guide. It was trying to deliver you to the truth of your own being. Because pain, in its purest form, is awareness. When you are in pain, you are awake. You cannot hide behind illusions or distractions. You are forced into the present moment, into raw reality. Pain strips away pretense, dismantles false identities, humbles the ego, until only the essential remains. That's why so many spiritual traditions from Buddhism to Christianity to Stoicism center on the sanctity of suffering. Not because suffering is good in itself, but because it reveals truth. It is the crucible through which consciousness refines itself. And here lies Jung's final insight. What you call suffering is actually the process of becoming conscious. When you feel lost, it is the unconscious pushing against the walls of your current understanding. When you feel despair, it is life demanding that you expand your capacity to feel. When you feel powerless, it is the ego dissolving so that a deeper form of power can emerge. Pain is the bridge between who you are and who you are meant to become. You see, the psyche is not static, it's evolutionary. Every trauma, every heartbreak, every humiliation is an initiation into deeper awareness. The pain you resist contains the wisdom you need. It's not your enemy, it's your initiation rite. This is why Jung compared the process of individuation, the journey toward wholeness, to alchemy. The alchemists believed that through fire and pressure, base metal could be transmuted into gold. Jung saw this as a metaphor for the psyche. Your base emotions, your wounds, your fears, are the lead of your consciousness. Through the fire of suffering, they are transformed into wisdom, compassion, and power. Without that fire, nothing changes. And so, the pain you've endured was never meaningless. Every loss, every failure, every betrayal, they were the universe's way of sculpting you into someone capable of carrying light. You may not see it now, but everything you've suffered has deepened you, shaped you, expanded your ability to love and understand. The very cracks that make you feel broken are the places where life enters. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." To accept yourself means to embrace not only your joy but your sorrow, not only your success but your failure, not only your light but your shadow. To reject any part of yourself is to reject the totality of your being. But when you accept it all, every scar, every flaw, every wound, something extraordinary happens. The division ends. The war within you ceases. You become whole. And wholeness is power. Not the power of control, but the power of presence. The power of being fully alive, unafraid of suffering, unafraid of feeling, unafraid of truth. This is the power that no external force can give or take away. It is not dependent on circumstance or approval. It is the quiet, unshakable strength that arises when you stop resisting reality. In that moment, pain transforms into something luminous. You begin to see that the very energy that once tormented you is the same energy that can awaken you. Suffering becomes sacred because it connects you to everything. It strips you of illusion, yes, but in doing so, it reveals the radiant stillness that was always underneath. This is the mystery the mystics tried to describe, the unity beyond opposites, where joy and sorrow, gain and loss, life and death, are not enemies, but two currents of the same river. When you reach that awareness, you stop asking life to be painless. You stop fearing the next fall, because you know now that pain is not punishment, it is participation. It is the price of being alive and conscious in a universe that grows through tension. You are not here to escape suffering. You are here to outgrow it. And the only way to outgrow it is to love it, not in a sentimental way, but with the fierce compassion of someone who understands that every wound carries intelligence. Love your pain enough to listen to it. Let it teach you how to live without illusion, how to be brave, how to open your heart even when it breaks. Because in that openness, in that surrender, lies true strength. Nietzsche understood this when he declared, "Amor fati, love your fate. Love everything that happens, not because it's easy, but because it's yours." To love fate is to stop dividing life into what should and shouldn't be. It is to trust that everything, even the pain, serves the unfolding of your soul. When you love your fate, you stop fighting reality. You stop needing life to be something other than what it is. And in that acceptance, you become free. That freedom is what Jung called the realization of the self. The moment when the ego no longer fights the unconscious, when light and shadow coexist, when suffering and peace merge into one vast awareness. It's not that pain disappears. It simply loses its sting, because you no longer resist it. You see through it, like light through glass. That is the gateway Jung spoke of, not a door you walk through, but a recognition. Pain is the threshold to your power, not because it makes you tough, but because it makes you real. And once you know this, once you truly understand it, the world changes. You no longer envy the happy or pity the broken, because you see that everyone is walking the same hidden path, carrying their own fire. You begin to sense that every tear shed adds to the great river of human awakening. You understand that to live deeply is to suffer consciously, and to suffer consciously is to love life enough to let it change you. So perhaps the final question isn't, how do I escape pain? But, what might I become if I stop running from it? Because on the other side of pain, there is no more running, only arrival. The arrival into yourself, the realization that you were never broken, only unfinished, that the pain you feared was the sculptor of your becoming, and that every wound, every loss, every shadow you've ever faced was never working against you, it was working for you, shaping you into something vast enough to hold both the dark and the light. That is the truth Jung left for us. The gateway to power is not outside your suffering. It is your suffering transmuted by awareness, illuminated by love. And when you finally walk through it, you will understand. Pain was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to make you real.